So yesterday I took an enormous amount of notes on Aeolus to walk you through the chapter, and apparently that's what I'm going to do in almost excruciating detail. But before we do that, I want to recommend a quick book that I've been audiobooking called The History of Philosophy by A.C. Grayling. I think it came out last year. And it is a very good overview of philosophy. I'm still like in Greek-Roman era, but it's helped clarify so many concepts about philosophy and the history and development of thinking. It's very clear, enjoyable, doesn't linger too long and go into super nuanced depth, but it goes into enough depth that I've learned a lot, and I really like it. I recommend it. As typical for Joyce chapters, a lot of times he'll just toss you in with all these words and names that you don't know what he's talking about. So this chapter, unless you are from Dublin, you probably don't recognize all these place names. They're just the names of various neighborhoods in and around Dublin that these electric trams are dispersing to. Remember, this is like the heart of the city, so these trams, they go all over and they're like distributing blood throughout the body, just like the press is going to be distributing ideas. You can think of these opening paragraphs as a movie, kind of like a long shot or establishing shot of the neighborhood, and then zooming in closer and closer. So after he introduces the neighborhoods and where we're at, he goes by the post office, Nelson's Pillar. Nelson's Pillar is a statue in honor of Horatio Nelson, but it is no longer there in Dublin. It was blown up by the IRA because I guess at some point Dubliners, or at least these members of the IRA, felt that having an English war hero over their city wasn't something they wanted, so they blew it up in 1966. And since then, now on that same promenade area, there is this giant spike. And as far as I know, there is no English war hero at the top. Not only is this the center of Dublin in terms of activity, but it's the center of the day. This takes place at noon, so this is the most active time of the day. Everything's movement is constant. So imagine the camera moving across the area, and we see some shoe polishers. We see the General Post Office, which is still there to this day. It's a very large building, historic building. And then we get to these newspaper offices. Bloom is in the middle of a conversation with this guy, Red Murray, who works in the newspaper offices. He was Joyce's uncle in real life, and they're talking about Bloom wants a paragraph, kind of a puff piece or an advertorial, or what would you call it, a product placement in the newspaper, rather than an advertisement that looks obviously like an ad. They want a little paragraph saying like, oh, Alexander Keyes, something about his store, a long tradition of, I don't know, something like that. Red Murray's like, okay, we can do that, and he cuts out this old advertisement and he gives it to Bloom. The editor of the Freeman's Journal, the daytime newspaper, is going to be passing by. His name is William Braden, and Bloom thinks of his neck as being really thick and all the brains being in his neck, and refers to him as almost a form. He calls him the form and it. We also get an image of his face as looking like Jesus or Mario the tenor, this 19th century singer. Then there is this part about His Grace called down this morning. It's unclear who this is referring to. It could be a sarcastic kind of name for the editor, or one of the editors, or the publisher. Or it could be this archbishop who one of the newspapers has been in a feud with. They've exchanged letters. Bloom moves towards the guy Nanetti, his reading closet, his little office, for checking the text and make sure it's going to print right. And he's passing through all this machinery, the newspaper printing works, and I love the description here. Machines. Smash a man to atoms if they get caught. Rule the world today. His machineries are pegging away too, like these, got out of hand, fermenting, working away, tearing away, and that old gray rat tearing to get in. Such a great passage. It's like about all of human history, culture, technology is just some vast enterprise that's out of control and nobody can possibly stop it. And that rat refers back to Hades, when Bloom saw this rat digging into dig down to one of the corpses. It presumably lived off the corpses. Bloom arrives at Neneti and thinks, strange, he never saw his real country. Ireland, my country. Neneti and Bloom were both born in Ireland, yet their identity goes back to more of a cultural past. For Neneti, apparently it's not a deal breaker with society and fitting in and succeeding, but for Bloom, even though he's not a practicing Jew and doesn't really even consider himself Jewish in a lot of ways, it keeps him distant from a lot of Dubliners. In the section under How a Great Daily Organ is Turned Out, we get some more examples of Joyce's voices. He's going to take on the style of various parts of the newspaper, advertisements, advice columns, and there's just something so strange and weird about how they feel. You realize that the way that newspapers work and media works is also very unusual. If you look back on old media, it just seems slightly ridiculous, and yet we think of our media as, natural and normal, but I think in 50, 100 years it's going to look really strange too. You remember Hines from the funeral? He was the guy that was asking for Bloom's Christian name and taking down the names of who was at the funeral. He runs into Bloom again in the offices, but Bloom remembers that he owes him, he says, 3 bob, and that's, I was curious, what is 3 bob? Is that 3 pounds? Is that a lot of money? But actually it's not, bob is apparently not pounds, it's shillings. And it was so 3 shillings, I calculated it as being about $25, $30, somewhere in there. Obviously money changes in strange ways and doesn't correspond equally for everything. Things get cheaper, things get more expensive, etc. But 3 bob seems to be about $25, $30. So not as much as I originally thought, which would have been a few $100s. But still a decent amount of money that Bloom wants it back. Bloom is certainly not going to forget. This is the 3rd time he's reminded Hines about this sum, but Hines is either pretending or really doesn't remember the amount. He's acting like he doesn't know about it. Bloom hands over the advertisement to Neneti that Red Murray cut out from the old newspaper. He says, Keyes wants this ad again, but he wants 2 keys, the image of 2 keys at the top that are crossed. Can we do that? Neneti is this really quiet guy. He's just listening the whole time. And but at the end he's like, okay, yeah, we can do that, but can you give me the image? And Bloom's like, I'll look into it. Also, by putting the phrase House of Keys, he's making a pun on the real House of Keys, which I guess the Isle of Man had slightly more control and self-rule than the rest of Ireland. So they had this council that helped them rule called the House of Keys, so that all the power and orders didn't come straight from Britain. From the UK, from England. And they came more from within. So it's a little joke. The Telegraph and the Freeman's Journal were both pretty nationalist toward self-rule. While Bloom is talking with Neneti, he considers asking him if he knows how to pronounce the Italian word voglio. Remember, he was thinking about Don Giovanni, and this is in one of the phrases that he recalls, I think. But he doesn't ask him because he's afraid he might embarrass Neneti. Consider how Bloom is so considering of other people's feelings, whereas in Hades nobody seemed to really even consider his feelings and identity. I like how also Bloom thinks back to the episode in Hades when he met that employer, John Henry Menton, and he said when he gave him the hat back, he would have said something like, looks as good as new now, like a really subtle insult. Bloom leaves, he goes by this guy, Monks, the day father, looks at all the machines, and he goes to the stairs, goes downstairs, and in the stairway there's some markings on the wall by matches or something. I'm not clear if this is referring to something. I'm kind of confused. If you have any ideas what this might mean, what it signifies, why that Joyce included it, please let me know, or if it's just a moment of realism, who knows.